Hello, dear listeners, dearest listeners, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Phil, that was the very end, I believe, of the word hello.
Oh, that was me saying yo.
Oh, yo. Wow, okay. We missed the Y, as usually happens with your mic. Do you like the fact, by the way, that there is a commenter who, on YouTube, who seemingly every episode, I mean, obviously there's our most famous every episode commenter. I can't mention him by name because he's supposed to do it on 100 consecutive episodes before, I believe I promised he'd be on the show. So we'll see. Hopefully he dies before then or something. We don't have to figure out the logistics of that. There's another guy who calls you the Oi Bruv. How do you feel about that?
He
says, can somebody get the Oi Bruv a new mic?
Complimented.
You feel complimented?
Though also, that does, I mean, yeah, because obviously I would like to be thought of as, street smart and, from the hood, as it were.
More of a Kyle-style Brit.
Yeah, I feel like this is simply reinforcing my rugged street cred.
My street credentials, as it were.
Indeed.
Anyway, the mic is working as well as we need it to be. This is the show, folks. Get used to it. Shut up. We're talking about some fights today. We had UFC 287, of course. Pereira versus Adesanya 2/4. My gut feeling was right, Phil. But it's impossible to say whether that result would have played out the way it did without my sort of complicated sadness hedge in trying to encourage Izzy to win by refusing to pick him on the gut feeling. We've also got coming up next week a really solid looking fight night card. In fact, we will see what that looks like when the date actually rolls around. Knowing how cruel the MMA gods are, we will likely have like two of the most enticing undercard fights canceled. But it's Max Holloway versus Arnold Allen in the main event. And then, of course, there's a lot of stuff on that undercard. There was a lot of stuff on the UFC 287 undercard. I think the latter is what we are going to cover later in today's show, namely Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal and Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez. If we have time to just sort of mention Kevin Holland versus Santiago Ponzinibbio, we will talk about that as well. But there are a couple other things on the 287 undercard and the aforementioned Holloway-Allen undercard, all of which will definitely be on a bonus episode up on our Patreon. So if you want to hear more about these two events, that will be the place to find it. Anyway, no further ado. We have the main event of UFC 287, Adesanya Pereira, the rematch, and yep, you called it, Phil. You were the only one you were brave enough to call it.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it was just like a probabilistic thing.
Yeah, well,
it was like, come on, these two have fought each other 4 times. You're going to say that Adesanya isn't going to win any of them?
Yeah,
despite how all these fights look. I mean, again, it would have been equally shocking if they fought 4 times, and Pereira didn't win any of them. Given how we've seen that they match up over the course of these 4 fights.
Yeah, sometimes those things happen, though.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was the rare example of a fight where both guys came out, and I just thought looked really good.
Yeah,
I thought. In terms of how they've matched up, it was certainly a different fight to the one that they had in kickboxing. It definitely felt like one which was informed by that stylistic choice that Izzy talked about. That the way that people fight in MMA and that aggression is stupid kind of thing. Because it was a far more measured fight than any of their kickboxing bouts were.
Yeah, but also a lot more aggressive than their last MMA fight from Izzy's side.
Yeah. I mean, but not even like in terms of the From Israel, this was closer to Leon Edwards than classic Israel Adesanya.
Yeah.
I think.
But like the Edwards who fought Usman just recently, that one.
Exactly. This was because much more of it was about space control than it was about volume.
Yeah.
Also, like, I thought this was actually a pretty startlingly good performance from Pereira. This was one of those ones where I thought he had a very good plan for how to make this work.
Yeah.
And what it didn't was, kind of slightly unfortunate for him.
I think people routinely underrate Pereira as a technical kickboxer. Like, because he's a massive puncher and he knocks everyone out. And as laughable as the comments are, like, after he beat Izzy, and of course MMA fans hold Izzy in such high regard as a striker, they're like, does this make Alex Pereira the greatest striker in MMA history? As silly as those comments are, like, this is not a guy who has, like, zero defensive awareness, zero ability to control the distance. His shot selection is obviously phenomenal. He's like he's a smart fighter. He's just like a smart fighter who, like, 50% of the time just thinks with his balls. Like, but that doesn't mean he's like he's not a reckless mess. And has not been for quite a long time. I mean, the Pereira that Izzy fought the first 2 times in kickboxing, that guy is no more. He has been a lot more like the fighter we saw here. And in the last fight, in the latter stages of his kickboxing career. Much more measured, really comfortable in the pocket, great counterpunching. Like, yeah. I also thought he looked fantastic, and I thought his strategy was excellent. This could have been one of those cases where the guy who wins and keeps winning just doesn't have any opportunity to adjust. Which, it certainly looked like Izzy was the one who learned the more crucial lessons from that last fight, as I hoped he would.
I mean, as we said at the time, this, even aside from the scoring, I think the last fight could be looked at as a good performance from Pereira. It
Absolutely.
was a good and surprising performance, and it was not a good one from Israel.
Absolutely, I agree.
But yeah, I mean, Izzy just had more room to improve.
Yeah, but that is often the case with rematches, right? Like, so did Leon after the second fight with Usman. It's like, well, you can't really do that much worse than most of that fight, even though you won. And it turns out he did much better. I thought, yeah, Pereira built on the performance last time. He wasn't like, it didn't look like he really needed to be pressuring constantly.
No, I thought he did a really good job of just approaching the fight as the bigger man.
Yeah.
Much of his approach was just clearly to draw Israel into pocket exchanges, in that he would just stand on the outside and just back up. No, not super hard, but meaningful low kicks.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, move away from the combinations, because if you're not standing in the pocket, then it's difficult for Israel to get in without overextending. That sticky right hand, that sticky, like, 1-2, sort of requires you to be standing there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was mostly just peppering and moving back, and and then if Israel started to move back from the low kicks, then he would come in after him. There were things that, it was one of those ones where I think he was still so dialed in on the left hook that I don't know if Pereira missed a jab.
Well, he hardly did in their last fight either. I mean, that's exactly what I was just going to mention, is that one of the major improvements over the last fight for Alex was that he used his jab a lot more and more often, earlier and more often.
I still felt like he could have done it like
that is what I was going to say too.
much more.
That is
like it was like Fiziev Gaethje kind of levels of success. You can't miss with this.
It's such a great punch. He has a fantastic jab. And because he's so heavy-handed, he doesn't have to put anything onto it. It can be just an arm punch, and it is stiff. You can see every time it connects, it is like any other Izzy opponent's right hand. Like, it is a cracking but very quick and zero telegraph jab. He just flicks it out there. And he used it really well, as he sort of discovered in the last fight, as like the tracking shot. Where anytime Izzy would get backed up and to a range where he would have to start circling or else get cornered, the jab would be the thing. It just sort of timing his lateral movement and then just popping him with this really quick but still somehow very heavy jab. Yeah, I agree. That's exactly what I was going to say. I loved how much more he used it. I want to see him use it at least twice as much as that. It's such a good punch, and particularly against Izzy, like that is the shot that opens him up for all the other heavier stuff.
Yeah. So apart from like the successes of Alex, there was obviously there was Izzy, and like we said, I think most of this was in Izzy controlling where he was in the cage.
Yep.
Trying not to get his back on the fence, mixing up which way he was going to step out, using a combination of feints and just stepping into the pocket and exchanging in order to get out without trying to resort to the clinch, which got him tired out last time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and obviously his own kicking game. I mean, this was a big story of the last fight, but Izzy was still the sort of low kick offense of Pereira was not a wash because Izzy was kind of working Pereira's to a lesser extent legs, but also like his body and so on.
His body and
with
his
own
arms.
Kicks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the mixing up the feints with the strikes and the direction changes and so on by the fence, and just trying to stay inside the black line just made a world of difference in this fight.
Yeah, it was a much more just it wasn't the kind of intense pressure and building long combinations that he put on Pereira in, say, their kickboxing rematch. Or that he did against, say, Brad Tavares earlier in his UFC career, but very, very much in the same way as Edwards Usman 3. It was just a more assertive performance. He was harder to back up. He didn't willingly concede space like Pereira had to insist on coming forward for him to give ground. When he did get cornered, he did not try to seek safety in the clinch. He realized that the safest thing to do was to take a risk and to beat Pereira back with punches. And I almost just used a classically embarrassing Britishism there, Phil. I almost said beat him off with punches.
Nice. Yeah, I guess you would have needed a rubber to erase that mistake.
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is the final irony of this fight, is that for all that we were like, he needs to stay off the fence and, not get pressured into punching exchanges. Like, much like their last fight, Izzy's big moment of success was counter-punching with his back to the cage.
Yeah, but he was a lot more, I still think that's a significant improvement. Like, it was inevitable. He's going to get cornered at some point. Unless he was being balls to the wall aggressive, which I didn't necessarily think he needed to be. He just needed to not let Pereira run him down the whole time.
And I think, Pereira was just doing a better job of making it hard to be balls to the walls aggressive against him.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a definite mix here between like Pereira. I mean, both of these guys basically maturing as fighters in the good and the bad way, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that you are simply those fighters are simply less insistent on pressure and offense and so on as they get older. Almost everyone is, apart from extremely special and very usually insanely aggressive fighters.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Izzy, this was a synthesis, I think, between the person that he's become in MMA, essentially.
Yes.
And the person that he needed to be to win this fight.
Yeah. This was an intelligently aggressive approach. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't reckless. And when he had to be defensive, even the decision he made, because it did look like the momentum was turning against him. I mean, the low kicks were clearly starting to affect him badly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why Pereira decided to turn it on. I think his idea was just to build the pressure over the course of the fight. In fact, he came out in the second round after a very close and competitive first, and basically, I thought, tried to test Adesanya by just putting on like 45 seconds of really intense aggression. And then it didn't come back until near the end of that round when, like Izzy was buckling from every low kick that landed. But even in that instance, I thought Izzy's defensive decision was he didn't try to be too smart or too cute. He put his fucking guard up. You know, he got backed up. He was like, uh-oh, I didn't want to get stuck in the corner, but I'm stuck. He just covered up. And Pereira bounced a couple shots off his gloves. And then he started going to the body. And when his hands were down to work in the body, Izzy was like, now I'm going to crack him. And he punched him with basically the exact overhand right, earning almost the exact same physical reaction from Pereira as the one he landed in the first round of their last fight. Just like whipped it over while he was throwing the left hook, and Pereira just sort of like slumps over on his feet. And then one more combination, which really reminded me of the counter combos against Whitaker,
Yes.
and put him to sleep. But even that, like just choosing his moment to throw back, not trying to slip everything, not like keeping his hands away so he can like awkwardly try to like swat at the punches or reach for the clinch, which got him in trouble in the last fight. He was like put in a bad situation, which happens. And I thought he showed some maturity in dealing with it in the actually intelligent way, which is like not the kind of intelligence that's just stroking your own ego. You're like, look at how slick I am. Look at how smart I am. These guys can't touch me. It was like, uh-oh, I need to cover up. Just, I think mature is exactly the word for this. And I want to see them fight again because Pereira looked, in many ways, even better this time than he did in the last fight. And we both agree the last fight was a very solid performance from him. No matter how the scorecards were going, I will insist that it was a good fight from Pereira in which, despite a few hiccups, his momentum and control over the bout was basically just building for the entire 24 minutes.
It wasn't 24 minutes, it was like
23. What was it?
Well, you mean the first fight, sorry, yes.
Yeah, the first MMA fight. Yeah. And this looked like an improvement on how he looked in that fight. He looked very controlled from the beginning. He looked really aware of what was going to be, what Izzy was sending his way, even though it was a very different approach from Izzy. He looked prepared to break him down slowly. And he just tried to seize his moment slightly too soon and got clipped. That happens. I wouldn't say this is a damning performance for Pereira at all.
No, I mean, yeah, exactly. This was his version of Israel's second fight they had together. Where,
yeah.
He essentially looked like the better fighter for most of it. And then, he just, as you said, he made a mistake. They're never going to fight again, obviously. I think Kyle said this on Twitter. I 100% agree with him. It's never.
Dana White already said it, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, no, but Pereira doesn't particularly sound like he cares about getting this one back. He's 3-1 up. Izzy doesn't want to get it back. Obviously, he's won the last fight with a shocking KO. He's got the narrative redemption story. He's the champion.
Yep.
And I don't think Pereira is interested in trying to make middleweight anymore. I mean, if you looked at the light heavyweight division, if you were him,
oh my god,
I mean,
yeah,
you would just be looking at it thinking, who are these jokers?
Yeah. No, and I love the idea of Pereira at light heavyweight. I'm okay. I mean, I would love to see these guys fight again, but I'm also perfectly okay with them both just moving on with their careers. It was a very satisfying little 2-fight series they had.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I was like happy to see it for Izzy as well, because is someone. As I said, it's just one of those things where like I feel for someone when they roll the dice and come up short multiple times, and we'll get to this, when we talk Rob Font. But so he's someone who's sort of ed for greatness and bet on himself like multiple times, and is sort of underrated as a fighter for doing that. The fact that he immediately went up to a heavyweight to challenge, pretty much, as opposed to John Jones, who did it after however many years to an even more faded version of the division than it used to be extant, or GSP doing it to Bisping. This was he went up pretty quick, and just this was one of those fights where the amount of pressure on him had to be completely insane.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was a great performance. Even if Pereira might have been winning it, Israel did everything you could have reasonably asked of him to make it his fight.
Yeah, and if you're going to compare it to, which I get the comparison, I think it's a good one. But if you're going to compare it to their kickboxing rematch, Izzy was doing better, despite Pereira having the edge. He was doing better in the early going of this one than Pereira was in their second kickboxing fight. It was, again, he looked good too. And I think this is, in a lot of ways, just fundamentally a difficult matchup for him. So, what was the thing with Pereira's kids or whatever? Like, everyone was talking about this. The only thing I saw after the fact was Pereira and Izzy talking backstage, and I thought they had a really nice, like, earnest exchange through the translator.
Oh, it's the Pereira's kid has been making fun of Israel for getting knocked out, and so
I see.
He pointed at him in the crowd and then mimed falling asleep.
Is that who that was directed to? Okay, I see.
Apparently so.
See. That is very, very Izzy, like in an Arrested Development way, to like take a moment to win a beef against I'm guessing 14-year-old, something like that.
I think he's 12.
Oh my god, that is so in character. All anime fans.
Exactly.
This is your avatar. You read baby books. This is your avatar.
It's just like this giant muscular man, like jumping up and down and flexing after he's just beaten a kid at like a Magic the Gathering tournament.
Yeah, exactly.
In your face.
But despite that, I did enjoy the exchange. I thought it an impressively tactful little rhetorical moment. Izzy approached Pereira and he was like, "Hey, I want to come train with you. We should work together. I want to come train in Brazil. I didn't get to enjoy Brazil last time I was there because you knocked me out." I thought that, that's a very graceful way to handle your victory. But then it was after saying that I found out that he had apparently been taunting Pereira's barely teenaged son. So he's a mixed bag, Izzy Adesanya. That it is what it is.
I mean, afterwards, Pereira was like, they talked to him about it, and he was like, just in his classic like emotionless way, he was just like, I don't know that I wouldn't have done the same thing.
To be fair,
something along those lines. He seems extremely unfazed.
That's pretty cool. To be fair, my kid was mouthing off a lot.
Yeah, it was like, it is odd, but who amongst us? That kind of thing. I couldn't quite tell through the slightly weird translation, but yeah, I don't think either of them. And it's a weird. They've got a strange dynamic there. I think. Yeah. I think Israel kind of genuinely admires Pereira in a way and would like for them to be friends, and Pereira is mostly just slightly bemused by him.
Yeah, that is very much what I got out of the interaction that Pereira posted to Twitter. And to tell everyone, he was like, just so everyone knows I'm all right, and he posted the video of Izzy approaching him backstage, and they were very respectful, and I enjoyed that. I think in many ways this is both guys come out of this looking really good.
I mean, yeah, for like, I'm gonna say MMA rivalries, but it's a MMA and a kickboxing rivalry. They've both got brutal knockouts over the other, and they've just been great fights pretty much the whole time. They've been edge of your seat kind of stuff, even if there's been criticisms you could level.
Yeah, and pretty much all the savagery has been has been kept to the cage or the ring. I enjoy it. Yeah, it is what it is. And speaking of things that are what they are, we are next going to talk about Max Holloway versus Arnold Allen, which is coming up next weekend. I don't know why I'm entering Zane Simon mode, but I'm going to tell you that it is happening at the T-Mobile Center in Kansas City. Guess where Kansas City is, Phil?
Nebraska.
Missouri. Your instinct was correct that it is not technically in Kansas. It's right on the border. Anyway, Holloway, Allen, after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
And welcome back to Heavy Hands. I already told you what it is. It's Holloway versus Allen. Phil, how far will Arnold Allen's game go? And do you, like me, feel that you still don't know exactly all the things this guy is good at?
Yeah. This feels like every fight has been, recently has been like a moderate step up that he's pretty much just cleared. With the exception of that fight with, I mean, honestly, the last two, which means that you might be thinking, the one hand, this could really be a elite fighter coming into his prime.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it could be Dan Hooker making an extremely ill-advised choice to go back to a weight class that is clearly very bad for him.
Yeah.
And it could be Calvin Kattar just starting really slow and then having his foot fall off. What was it that happened?
Yeah, he tried an extremely badly timed flying knee and awkwardly landed and twisted his knee and like tore every fucking ligament in his leg very early in the second round. Yeah, it's an unfortunate asterisk because I would like to think with no reservations that Allen is one of these fighters who, he had a lot of close fights like with lower level competition. It's like his fight with Nick Lentz wasn't like a blowout. You know what I mean? And I would like to think that he's one of these fighters like Makhachev, although Makhachev was more dominant on the way up, or Jourdain. Sorry, I was about to say Alan Jouban. Like Charles Jourdain, who in different ways, really turn it on and meet their level of competition where they need to be met. And more like Makhachev, in that Allen appears to have become suddenly a very measured, round-winning fighter, has started going for the kill now that his opponents are better than they've ever been. And the results have been good, but unfortunately there are reservations, which you just pointed out. That the Dan Hooker one, how much did that have to do with Dan Hooker's psychological state and the ill-advised weight class change? Was that the kind of performance that is sustainable? What would have happened if he hadn't got the finish? I don't know. And then against Calvin Kattar, to be fair, Allen looked great. He won a really clean first round. But that's just what happens in Calvin Kattar fights. And right when it was about to get interesting and the test was going to start building, the fight ended. So you want to say that it was a great performance from Allen and he got the finish, and I wish we'd seen more, but Allen definitely won. But with Calvin Kattar, it is absolutely uncertain whether anyone who wins a first round against him is going to win the rest of a 5-round fight. That is just not the kind of fighter he is. So, I don't know. I loved the decisions Allen was making. I loved his use of the jab. I loved his nice, tight, straight combinations. I loved his body work. Loved the leg kicks. I thought, and I think his footwork is improving. He's a guy who's always moved laterally a lot, but he looks like he's doing it much more purposefully now. But I just don't know. Neither of these performances necessarily scream like sustainable approach. Neither of them assure me that he won't like slow down at some point in the middle of a 5-rounder, or that he will like hit a wall where the opponent has figured out his patterns and, but on the other hand, having been in a shitload of dogfights on his way up the rankings, Allen did always prove himself as a guy who just sort of found a way to win when the fight got hard. Like, he is definitely a scrappy fighter.
You can pull different elements from many parts of what we've seen from Allen.
Yeah.
We've seen that he can be a violent swarmer. He can just work a jab and low kick game. He can scramble. He can submit.
Mm-hmm.
He can kind of just score points from the outside. So he's been very tactically flexible, and he's basically pretty much always in the UFC done what he's needed to do to win, including some pretty narrow wins, and sometimes it's been surprising. What we've seen. It was against was it Yusuf? Essentially,
he dropped him with a head kick and basically got out-volumed by Sadiq Yusuf, but landed the more damaging strikes throughout.
Yeah, it's like a real odd one.
Yep.
I mean, and going all the way back to I think it was Alan Omer. I can't remember. I don't think he was doing that great. In his UFC debut between two Cage Warriors alumni.
Just a very even, scrappy fight.
Pick up the win.
Where he just held a slight advantage most of the time. He was losing the fight with Mads Burnell. Just straight up losing it. He was just getting pressured and outboxed off the back foot, and he pulled out a submission to come back and win. So it's not like these sort of not entirely convincing wins are anything new for Allen. He has essentially continued to do what he has always done against higher level competition, but in a much more instantaneous way. And I just don't know. I don't know yet. And certainly, assuming that Max Holloway looks anything like, at least, it is a question, because the man got taken to school and beaten up very badly by Volkanovski in their last fight. But if he can recapture anything like the form he had as recently as the Yair Rodriguez fight, he seems like a fighter, like a souped-up Calvin Kattar, basically, extremely well poised to test how durable these tactical ideas really are, and whether in becoming an earlier finisher, a more aggressive fighter in the early going, whether Allen has sacrificed what used to be a pretty necessary need to claw his way back into a close fight and win late.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know. So what about Max Holloway? How are you feeling about the blessed one lately?
Yeah, that Volkanovski fight, it just looked like he came up against the unscalable wall that is Alexander Volkanovski, as I believe it was the Korean Zombie who put it. Difficult to pull much away from that one, other than that Volkanovski just looks like he'd figured him out.
Yeah.
But that is a long way from, Calvin Kattar proved after Max Holloway lost to Volkanovski, I think it was the first time, there's still a large gulf between pretty much the entire rest of the division and the number two to Alexander Volkanovski. But I think the interesting things about this one are that, taking the Dan Tom, how does this person do against this specific stance that his opponent's in, approach? Well, has Max Holloway done against southpaws in the UFC? And the answer is kind of not that well. Because it's mostly Dustin Poirier.
Well.
An actual, southpaw that he's fought. It's Dustin Poirier and it's Conor McGregor. beat both of them.
That's true.
But then, like, you go to, you know, how did those fights look? But also, you know, how does Holloway fight and how does Allen approach this kind of thing? And I don't think it looks great for Arnold Allen. I think the basic pieces for what Arnold Allen wants to do in this fight are all... he can certainly... You can certainly have success with what he wants to do, because it is... At least his approach against Keita is essentially what Poirier did to Holloway, just at a lower level of violence, which is that he sort of blocked. He's hand fought and kind of blocked jabs, and then just overpowered him with. Occasionally landed his own rear hand, and then kind of overpowered Keita in pocket exchanges, partially because Keita was unable to initiate safely on him. And I think Allen is Allen still TriStar?
I'm not entirely sure. I think he might train with a sort of consortium of different camps, but I think he is.
Yeah, I mean, to at least some extent, but he definitely has some TriStar in him, because he has that very classic TriStar high elbow frame. Yeah,
which, to be fair, so does Dustin Poirier. Poirier likes that move a lot. Yeah, but
I was going to say, like, the TriStar one is very specific. It's, you know, your lead hand comes up with your elbow sort of brought to your temple. Typically it's used by... orthodox TriStar fighters, because that's what most of them are, block right hands on the return after the jab. With Allen, it's used to, like, fuse the close stance hand fight. Just, you know, Keita was just jabbing into his elbow a lot. And Holloway, I think, in the Poirier fight, he shows that he's a pretty diverse... he's still a fairly diverse open stance fighter. Like, I don't think it's going to be a question of Allen being able to dictate exchanges because he's able to control the jab, and in the same way that he was against Keita. So, like, Holloway has the big long right to the body. He's got his weird, like, jumping oblique kick to enter. He's also, you know, much more willing to enter behind a wide left hook, get around the guard. And just more likely to also build exchanges even if he's getting the first strike blocked. Basically, he's at least at his best, and this is an area of fighters' games which tends to erode away a bit for obvious reasons. He's a good open stance kicker as well. He's got a good right body kick. I'm not sure how much Allen is going to be able to. I'm not sure how much Allen is going to be able to diffuse Holloway's offense to the same extent that Poirier could. Nor am I sure that he have to see it to think that he's got the same kind of firepower as Poirier does coming back the other way as well. You know, he's shown some impressive...
Yeah.
You know, he's stunned people, knocked them down, and so on. But, you know, Poirier is one of the biggest punchers at lightweight.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, gratifying to myself, said this before his more recent performances, I did have a feeling that Allen was a puncher from a while back. In a sort of...
Yeah, for sure.
In a sort of Drew Dober mode. How the style was not conducive to delivering that power, but really, as I said, his footwork has become a lot more methodical and subtle. He is not like when he has to move laterally, because like all the TriStar guys who use that style of defense, his head is like super far forward. He essentially boxes out of a wrestling stance. So he needs his footwork. Like, he needs the lateral movement because his head is in range anytime that he is engaging with punches. It's just built into his stance. And that's very much like Rory, you know, who had similar difficulties with, like, you know, jabbers and stuff like that because his face was just right there to be touched. But his footwork has settled down, and it has enabled him to plant his feet a lot more, and we have been seeing the power. I do think he is a more than respectable puncher.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just like...
It's Dustin Poirier. Yeah.
It's Dustin Poirier. He punched Max Holloway a lot, and then Max Holloway was like, ow.
Yeah, he was like...
Ow, quit it.
Hurting. It was one of those fights where Holloway was getting hurt seemingly by every clean shot that landed through the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, but also he was Max Holloway.
Yeah.
And you can go back and rewatching it is staggering to think.
Yeah.
This goes 5 rounds when you're watching the first.
Yep.
It's due to the level of offense that Poirier puts out on Holloway in that first round.
Yeah.
And, gets hurt himself as well. But,
yeah, he's actually the first one
that is
dropped.
There's absolutely... Poirier is, absolutely elite top shelf in terms of pure, power offense.
Yeah. I will say a couple of specific things that Poirier really troubled Max with in that fight. I mean, there's also the fact that Poirier is just bigger, too. Although, to be fair, I don't think Allen is a small featherweight.
Oh, he is. He's a big man.
He's not like really tall, but that man has like a Demetrius Johnson back. He's got a really, really solid upper body.
He didn't look super outsized by Dan Hooker, who is fucking ginormous.
No, not at all. He's a very good sized featherweight. The one thing that most troubled Holloway from Poirier was the southpaw right hook.
Mm-hmm.
Which Allen actually throws quite well. This is frequently the shot that surprises orthodox fighters in general, just because, you get hyper-focused on the southpaw's left hand, you try to base a lot of your decisions around this foot battle, and the left hook just plays by different rules in an open stance fight. Like, there are a lot of instances I could point to in boxing where fighters... The first one that comes to mind is like Miguel Cotto versus why am I forgetting his name? Not Margarito. Martinez? What's his first name? Sergio Martinez. Where he is just landing the jab against the southpaw and then repeatedly finding the left hook from this inside angle, like stepping in as if on the line of a jab, but throwing a hook instead of the straight jab. And this is not usually it's not a position that exists in a closed stance fight. And it's usually in a closed stance fight, you have to step outside to land a good hook, just as you do to land your right hand, to kind of line it up. You have to create the angle. And the hook in the southpaw versus orthodox fight is just really, really sneaky. It comes from unusual angles. It plays off of the jab, I would say, even better than it already does in a closed stance fight. And it's just much closer to the target from its starting point. And it also literally comes from behind your back. So, like, it is a blindside punch. Comes over your shoulder, and you often don't see it until the last second. Anyway, these are all things that Poirier just wrecked Holloway with in the first 2 rounds of that fight. He landed lots of other punches, but repeatedly it was the right hand that really hurt Holloway, that he could not seem to see coming. And, yeah, I mean, that's a specific tactical thing that I think Allen can absolutely exploit. I think he can honestly replicate a lot of what Poirier did in the early going of that fight.
Sure.
My question is it sustainable? Can he deal with what Holloway managed to do after those first 2 rounds and survive? And I don't know. There have been signs that he can. I don't know how that fits into this newly aggressive game he's adopted. And I just don't know. It's
one of those ones where I have to see it, really.
Yeah, but it is there. Like, the possibility is there. Allen he's a difficult fighter to kind of sum up. But I think inherent to his nature is that he is just a really hard-nosed, mean bastard.
I think it's going to be a tough fight. I don't think this is going to be a Eita or an Ortega style thrashing.
Yeah,
there's definitely things that Allen can build on. It's just stuff like that high frame guard. It's just not as. Don't think it's as deep as Poirier's ability to like pick shots off with his elbows.
Yeah,
like the first time Holloway threw one of his favored open stance punches, the long right to the body, which again is a good punch to throw. Poirier just picked it off.
Yeah.
I don't think Allen's going to do that. And yeah, it's just a question of firepower for me. Allen has advantages over Poirier, like you said. I think he's just quicker. It's going to be harder to. He's going to be harder to close down Holloway. His rear hand is very quick and untelegraphed.
Yep.
He's less reliant on the right hook as like a way of like holding and dealing damage, because he's going to be able to just throw the rear straight more often. Yeah, it's just a question of like, this is such a higher level of like durability and depth and adaptation to pretty much anyone else in the division, and we've seen people on their way up run into the Holloway wall multiple times.
Yes,
and there's been one person who's been able to clear it.
Yeah, basically. Holloway would undoubtedly still be the champion if Alexander Volkanovski didn't exist.
No question.
He and Volkanovski are clearly on a tier above the rest of the division, which is why it is terrifying to think that Volkanovski is now appears to be on a tier above him. But
yes.
I think I have to agree. I am excited by the possibility of Allen showing something here. Again, I think the elements are there, and he has surprised me in many of his fights. I think he's just a very scrappy and resourceful fighter. I think he is a very difficult man to break, which is usually when things really go wrong against Holloway. Like Yair Rodriguez did not break, and while he did not win that fight, it was a very tough fight for Max the entire way. Max himself is not a brilliant defensive fighter. And
there's the obvious caveat that you barely have to mention is that Holloway has been in an insane number of wars for someone who is, I think, 31.
Yeah. And just essentially had himself, I think, definitively shut out of the title picture.
That at some point, his durability will fail him, and it will be shocking and...
Yes.
It
was years ago that we were all like expressing concern about him sounding like punch drunk and like struggling with his weight cut. And remember how disheartened we were before the second fight with Volkanovski, because it wasn't it the case that got canceled on short notice because Holloway just like wasn't cleared.
I think so.
And there were some very concerning signs, and the man is continuing to cut to this weight, which I would have loved to see him stick at lightweight, honestly, even after the Poirier fight. Like, that's probably the hardest fight in that division for him. But this is going to be a hard fight, even without all those caveats. And it just feels like the kind of test you have to see Allen pass before you could possibly pick him to do it. But
that's the thing. He's had lots of those fights.
He has had a lot of them.
You've just been like, this is in the upper range of the things I could possibly expect you to win.
Yeah.
And he's just gone and won it. He's just, he's still undefeated in the UFC. So it's, it is a great one. And I've got mixed feelings about it because Allen has been, something of a revelation to watch for that reason. Just a guy who's just quietly improved every time out. But then obviously on the other hand is Max Holloway, and you don't want to see Max Holloway fall off. So complicated feelings about this one.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to pick Holloway for all the reasons that you very effectively laid out. But I'll be watching that right hook. I'll be watching for an opening salvo, seeing if Max is getting hurt, and then I will be very curious what happens if he doesn't get finished after that. This could also be, by the way, a fight in which Max is a lot more sort of reserved. He's been trying to be creative recently, and adding new things to his game and not just being the pressure swarming, breaking opponent's will kind of guy. We shall see. Maybe this will be kicking Max, and we'll get like a weirdly long-range kickboxing match.
That probably wouldn't be the worst idea, at least in spots.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that'll do it. Both of us picking Max Holloway with understandable reservations, but certainly a very enticing fight, a genuine crossroads moment. This feels to me more likely than basically any of the others of all the up-and-comers that Max has shut down, like somebody who could possibly break through and beat him. It might just be the right time. It might be the right opponent. We'll see. But an enticing fight, to be sure. Let's take a break. When we come back, we've decided to basically just revisit the most interesting highlights from the UFC 287 undercard. That means Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal, Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez, possibly Holland versus Ponzinibbio. We may save that and the discussion of probably the best fight on the card, which was Gastelum versus Curtis. Both of those, that and Holland Ponzinibbio, may go on the bonus episode. But anyway, Burns, Masvidal, and Font Yanez at the very least after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about the co-main event of UFC 287, Gilbert Burns, Jorge Masvidal. I thought all things considered, Masvidal actually looked like he took this pretty seriously.
Yeah.
Compared to his more recent performances, I felt like he was like really trying not to get backed into the cage. He was really trying to work his jab. He was like, it's like him or somebody in his camp watched Burns' old fight with Rashid Magomedov and was like, we're going to do that. We're going to poke this guy with straight punches. We're going to keep him at bay.
Low kicks. It was
and that.
An approximation of like a round-winning strategy, which is, often what you don't get from Jorge Masvidal in any kind of fight. But I mean, this was at least, much better than just seeing him sell out on huge shifting swings.
Yes. Compared to the striking he showed against Colby Covington, this was a return to form.
On the other hand, Gilbert Burns did not look good.
Yeah.
The main thing about this for me was that, like, Gilbert Burns wanted to just spam right hands.
Yeah.
Could.
He really thought he thought he was gonna do what Usman did. Like, he came close on a couple points. But yeah, he really wanted to knock Jorge's ass out.
But I mean, also he could have just done that. He could have, because every time he just started just stepping in and spamming right hands on Masvidal. It pretty much worked.
Yeah.
And I also feel like a lot of Masvidal's ability to hold the center of the cage was because Burns was just being really tentative.
Yeah.
When he went after him, it just worked. And whether it was wrestling or whether it was just punching him in the face. It was actually, for me, it was actually kind of concerning. Because it is exactly the kind of approach that we said is bad for Usman and bad for Covington, and it's bad for Burns because neutral space defensive kickboxing is not what he's good at.
No, it is not. Yeah, he has a very rudimentary system of defense. I hesitate to even call it a system because it's a guard. And it's a guard that when things bounce off of it, he fires back with a combination immediately. It is a very offense is the best defense kind of approach, and use as little defense as possible to put yourself in a winning position in the fight. And I do agree, I suppose. It wasn't entirely clear what his plan was. It felt almost like a fight that should have happened earlier in Gilbert's career, where he was like trying to just get some time in and taking a calculated risk to work on his striking against a faded striker. But like this is, I kind of thought he was done with that phase.
Yeah, I mean, it reminded me a lot of Covington Woodley. It was like, the person you're up against is super shot. They're incredibly vulnerable to pressure and have been historically. Everything you do in the fight simply reinforces that because they panic immediately as soon as you hit them.
Yeah. And
you can hit them really easily, and you're still not doing it. Not really a good sign for Burns. Apparently, he also said that Masvidal was insanely greasy as well. It was just like, I'm not saying, oh, he felt a bit slippery. I'm telling you 100% this person was greasing.
Maybe he just very moisturized.
Apparently other people said that everyone was surprised at the amount of liquid that flew off Jorge when he got knocked out by Usman. Which is just a little anecdote I find very hilarious. Like, fighters just being like, put the spray on that man. That's not right.
That's more than usual, yeah. It did look like he had like Jerry curl in his hair or something, like just oil went flying, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. It would not be the first time I have heard it's enough for me to be a little dubious, because sometimes fighters just don't do as well as they would like, and they're like, oh, the opponent was greasing. I mean, there was the whole BJ Penn GSP thing. Do we really think that's definitive proof that GSP was greasing in that fight? I don't know. Then again,
I mean, I tend to buy what Gilbert Burns says, but I mean, it doesn't really matter, because
the other thing is, would I put it past Jorge to grease? No, I would not.
Yeah. And this was just a fight where he was a deserved massive favorite.
Yeah.
And didn't even have to fight particularly well in order to just run Masvidal out of the building. Although Masvidal apparently won a round somehow.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, he really should have been out there, I think, making a statement and taking Jorge to school. And even if there was greasing and that played into it, like when he tried, he was able to get Jorge's ass against the fence, and he was able to deck him with any variety of right hands, straight, overhand, uppercuts. They were all landing. So Jorge's just not that fast anymore, and he's never been a great defensive fighter to begin with. Put him in a position where it's all about how well he defends, and you're going to hit him clean.
Yeah. Pretty much it. Like, as we said, it's a tough matchup for Jorge at any point in his career, and was just pretty much unwinnable at this one.
Yeah, I did still think he looked better than I expected. I don't think it was. It wasn't just Gilbert's failing to capitalize. I thought Jorge actually made a lot of pretty good decisions with his striking, and as seems to be the case in every one of these recent fights, I just don't think he has the stamina anymore. Like, he just kind of becomes really sloppy and tired about halfway through a 3-round fight. But I thought he tried his best.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how about Rob Font, Adrian Yanez?
This was very gratifying to watch.
It was heartening.
Like, not because I dislike Adrian Yanez. He's a great kid and seems
he's awesome.
Has his head screwed on, and
he's a hell of a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, for poor fucking Rob Font, this must have been overwhelming for him.
I think you could see it in his reaction, like the amount of pressure I'm sure he was feeling after those last two fights, and then a year away. I mean, you have to come into a fight like this knowing that arguably you are being fed to an up-and-comer. That what remains of your corpse is being used to advance somebody else's career, And essentially, if you lose this, you're kind of done.
I mean, they said beforehand, he'd said that Marlon Moraes gave him his chance to take his ranking.
Yep.
Back in the day, and Font's just that guy. He was just like, yeah, I need to put it on the line. If I want to be a ranked fighter, I need to beat good fighters. So
Yep.
I'm going to fight this kid who's ranked much lower than I am. Yeah, it was just one of those things where, like, doing the right thing and being gutsy and so on, as it sometimes doesn't in this sport, just like paid off for him.
Mm-hmm.
Both those Aldo and the Vera fights, as I've repeatedly banged on about, were fights where you just couldn't fault how Rob Font approached them, really. But just like, even who those people were, that's what you should do. You should rack up points on them, and you should try and set them a pace that they're not going to keep. And instead, he ended up getting kind of brutalized. And it's nice to see, sort of in a similar way to, like, Adesanya, he three losses down to Pereira. Eventually, the kind of the numbers came up in his favor.
Yep.
And, trying to didn't allow himself to think that, the loss was an inevitability, or to freak out, or to, say to himself, this was the wrong way to approach any of this. He just went out and did his thing and got the win.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a cool fight for as long as it lasted. And it's just like great stuff from Rob Font.
Yeah, and actually, I really liked the way he approached it. I did. I sort of supposed that we might see a less single-minded Rob Font than we did in those previous two fights. He was certainly aggressive, especially when he hurt Giannis. He was going for it like a fucking maniac. But I thought, I suppose that he might come in and be a little more flexible, and I hoped that he would kind of treat the jab as a weapon in its own right, not just be constantly trying to set up combinations and overwhelm Giannis's defense, which is quite good. That he would have a better chance of breaking his defense down a little more slowly if he just stuck him with the jab a bunch of times. And I thought he did that. There were a lot of pivoting jabs, a lot of counter jabs from Rob Font, a lot of jab exchanges. I thought, to his credit, Giannis seemed to have learned from that early fight with, I forgot his name last week, too. What's the guy's name? You know the one. Randy Costa.
Randy Costa, yeah.
Jesus Christ. That he seemed to have learned from that. He was very early on trying to counter Rob Font's jabs. He was trying to jab with him, which very often is all you need. I mean, I think of Ken Norton, Muhammad Ali 1. Muhammad Ali has a famous jab. And granted, this is a fight where he looked like shit. I mean, it's one of his famous losses, and it's one of his worst performances. But a big part of why he was never able to build his way into the fight after a rough start is that Norton came in with the simple plan of jabbing when Ali jabbed. Just do not let him jab for free. And I thought Giannis seemed to have taken that lesson. And even so, Font was willing to kind of work more. It's funny to say working slowly when he knocked the dude out in the first round. And like quite quickly, but
I mean, this was an objectively quite high-paced fight.
Yeah, but it just felt a little more, I don't know, measured and tactical from Rob Font. That it wasn't. He felt very single note in those last few fights, and for all that is broadly the right approach to win MMA bouts at this level, you don't just have to be like every attack is a combination. I'm constantly swarming. I'm constantly putting things. The jab is not just a setup. It is a punch, and it's a safe, long-range punch, and it allows you to move your feet and keep control of the bout, even while delivering damage. And that I thought Font did a pretty good job of.
I mean, in general, it was like it was choosing whether this was a bridging point. So it was, sometimes it was just a jab, sometimes it was a double jab, sometimes it was a jab into, Rob Font things, big sweeping uppercut or right hand. And And yeah, I think that was doing us. And sometimes, sometimes it was 3 punches. Sometimes it was literally, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. But it just felt more flexible, more relaxed.
And then that was keeping Yanez on his toes a bit. I saw Jack Slack mentioning the collar ties, and that's sort of, that's also quite Rob Font. That, again, another Adesanya thing.
Punching into head
Sticky
control.
jab sometimes, as in literally, not just like leaving the punch out there, but punching into the collar tie and then using it to grab Yanez and follow up. I mean, that was the finishing strike, which, just threw Yanez across the ring. Cage even. Was him, sort of like Font punching into his own open hand kind of thing, except his hand was holding Yanez's head.
Yeah.
Like he was cracking a coconut.
Doing one of these, punching your baseball mitt kind of maneuver.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually the usage in which I first applied that term, the sticky punch thing, which I'm very grateful to see catching on. Also, Daniel Cormier clearly looked at that thread. Because he mentioned it in the Adesanya fight. He was like, yeah, one thing that Izzy did the last time around is he stuck the jab out there and he let it hang in Pereira's face, to kind of blind him for the right hand. I was like, Daniel did not come up with that on his own.
Yeah, that was Miguel Class.
He saw Miguel Class's thread.
Stuff, yeah.
All I need is to hear the commentator say sticky punch, and my life will be complete. A small but genuinely useful bit of terminology that I came up with because there was no term for it. But that was the term that was how I originally used it. It was about Floyd Mayweather, who would frequently punch into collar ties. This is also something Andre Ward did a lot. I have heard other boxing people call it head control, just when you reach out and you can either sort of cross-face somebody and pull them past to like help you pivot, or you can do it the other direction, sweeping them like towards your other hand. And you can get to that kind of like passing grip off of a punch. You jab the guy, your hand is already out there, now you just kind of push his head, you control him, you keep him at bay, you put him off balance, you keep him like distracted and whatnot while you reset your feet, or you punch into a collar tie and you dirty box his ass off, which is largely how Font did it here. They weren't entirely clean exchanges. I mean, Yanez is such a quick-fire counterpuncher. Like Rob Font, for a fight that lasted less than 3 minutes, his face was halfway to the face he had after the 5 rounds with Chito Vera. He was definitely getting decked. Yanez was throwing down every time he grabbed onto him, every time he stepped in to deliver his right hand. The makings of a repeat of those last 2 Rob Font fights were there. But he made some more measured decisions along the way, and he got it done. And I agree. Very, very good to see. Very emotionally satisfying for, as you said, poor fucking Rob Font to get this win.
And it's one of those things that reminds you, like, Font is a good finisher. He was a very, pretty much one of his things that he used to do. That, him fighting Jose Aldo and Marlon Vera should not necessarily disabuse us of this fact.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's also one of those things for like Yanez, where I don't think any less of him after this at all. It was just a great fight with someone who was a level of technician and offensive threat above that of what he's been fighting so far.
Yep.
And who just had a great performance and kind of caught him, and was, you could clearly see him being like, oh, I'm not used to people who are hit this hard but are this like coherent. I'm sure Davey Grant hits probably maybe almost as hard as Rob Font, but he's
a mess.
Is a mess, and you're constantly going to be finding ways to bail your way out of it. But Rob Font, even in his finishing flurries, is finding ways to build from small things into big things, whether that's jabbing into catching your head, or just working in body shots or knees or whatever. He's a very smart fighter.
Yeah, and I would like to see this as a learning opportunity for Yanez, that like he too could actually afford to be a little more measured and a little more just defensively sound and aware, and more aware of like the distance he's keeping, that he doesn't have to be inviting exchanges all the time. This, I feel like, is the next stage, the next level of striking that we are already seeing emerge at the highest levels. Like we just talked before about Adesanya, and used the most recently on Edwards fight to contextualize that. We're seeing like distance sort of understood as a very important like offensive weapon, that sort of just keeping the correct posture and staying right on the edge of range where you do not have to make critical defensive responses at all times. But neither are you so wary of having to make those responses that you're just backing up. And it's just a very simple, but at the same time, very subtle, like psychological thing in a fight, that like you feel your opponent drawing away, you feel good and you want to chase them. It's like, you know, if you turn your back on a tiger, and it's like, even if you've been feeding it for 5 years, it's going to try to murder you because that's in its DNA. It just wants to kill things that turn away. And yeah, like this is how people are in fights. Like you have to project calm resilience, and that you are there and you're not bothered and you're not backing up unless it's necessary. And by that I mean you're not backing up unless it's like the opponent has now overcommitted to get to you and they are going to stumble when they miss as you back up, and then you can reclaim the space. You're not just giving ground as a first idea. And Yanez could afford to go like the other way, a little more towards that, where he can just sort of be assertive and keep a semblance of control over the fight without having to chase exchanges constantly. And he is a good enough and technical enough boxer to do that, for sure. He's one of the better boxing technicians in this division right now.
I mean, I also think that, you know, he probably he might well have taken some of the wrong lessons from Rob Font's fights with Vera and Aldo, which is like, you can just outpunch this dude because he's frail.
It looked like that's
which is not quite what they did against Rob Font, is that both of them stayed, you know, I mean, Vera, we've talked about this, but both of them stayed as defensively responsible as they could.
Yeah, they were both very low output performances. That was the notable thing about them. They didn't do much.
Yeah, because they waited for their moment when they could insert when they could basically land a big punch, because Rob Font wasn't going to be ready for it, because he'd been busy setting all his combinations up on the same rhythm, and they could figure out where it was without getting hurt too badly. You know, there is obviously a middle ground to strike between being like, I'm going to attack every exchange as aggressively as possible right at the beginning, and I'm going to be Cheeto Vera. I'm just going to stand there for like minutes on end.
Basically, the middle ground is be Jose Aldo. Adrian, listen to me very carefully. Just be Jose Aldo. It works, and it pretty much still works really well. Like, be Jose.
Maybe a little bit higher pace, but you know.
Yeah. But you know, I'm just going to look at the first round, just out of curiosity, statistically, of Font Aldo. In the first round, significant strikes attempted, it was 90 from Rob Font, 41 total thrown from Aldo. In the half of a first round of this fight, 75 from Rob Font. A lot more of those were just jabs, I think. 54 from Yanez. So already on pace to more than double the kind of pace that Aldo was keeping. I think you hit on a very good point there, that the lesson to take away from those fights is not simply that Rob Font is fragile and that you can just trade punches with him and win. In fact, that is a very dangerous way to fight Rob Font. Just because he looked like the volume guy in those fights, as you said, he has actually been a significant puncher for the vast majority of his MMA career.
Huge hands.
He has a puncher's build, man, the classic puncher's build. Massive hands, long arms. He hits really fucking hard. So yeah, like I said, this should hopefully be. It was really great to see for Rob Font, gets him back on track. I mean, frankly, this is the kind of fight where I just wish he would retire. Like, you did it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I
Just
think
be
kind
done.
of like it's one of those ones where I kind of want to see him take a step back now,
Yeah, and it's
even though he shouldn't, and that would be wrong from like.
and it's not going to
competitive
happen
standpoint.
either. I mean, if anything, the biggest step back he'll take is he'll be taking on some other dangerous up and comer.
Or they'll like give him Yarn, like I think Zayn might have suggested.
Oh God,
And no, he's a bastard.
he is, isn't he? A piece of shit.
Just
that
a
guy
son
is.
of a bitch.
Yeah, Rob Font is currently number 6. Yeah, I mean, like, let him fight Dominic Cruz, who's number 7. Like, you know,
Yeah.
that's fine. That's safe. They're probably
Yeah.
gonna give him like Song Yadong or something,
Much more likely, yes.
and that is one where he may very well get nuked again. Give him if you got to give him an up and comer, give him Saeed Nurmagomedov.
Mm-hmm.
He could beat that dude's ass. That dude kind of sucks. But anyway, yeah. I want to see a more mature Giannis after this. I want Rob Font to retire, even though I know he won't. It was, a happy ending. Let it be an ending, Rob. Anyway, that'll do it. That is the happy ending of this week's edition of Heavy Hands. And I mean that in every sense of the word. Was it good for you? It was great for us. Let's see. Head over to patreon.com/heavyhands. We are going to have a bonus episode coming out, probably more or less concurrent with this episode, in which we are going to talk about a little more of the Holloway Allen undercard. That means Edson Barboza, Billy Quarantillo. That means, oh goodness, Iwan Kutalaba versus Tanner Bozer. It means Pedro Munoz versus Chris Gutierrez. That's a very interesting fight. It means Brandon Royval versus Matthews Nicolau. Also a very interesting fight. And is it Matthews or Mateus? I've heard both pronunciations. I'm going to go back to saying Mateus. I think it feels right.
We got to talk Holland, Pons, and Gaston and Curtis at some point as well, right?
And we are going to talk about, Holland versus the Pons and Gastelum versus Curtis. I think pretty clearly the best fight from UFC 287, right there in the featured prelim slot. A fantastic back-and-forth war between two stocky, slightly chunky middleweights. Anyway, all of that is going to be up on the Patreon. And next week on the main show, we will, of course, be back to recap Holloway versus Allen and probably say as little as possible about the following Fight Night card, which is main evented by Sergey Pavlovich versus Curtis Blades. But it also has Song Yadong already has a fight, Phil. He's fighting Ricky Simone.
Cool.
That's a fight. This one is a pretty solid-looking undercard, too. So we will have plenty to talk about next week. And until then, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you'd be damn sure you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.